On this episode of AV Week, we get relationship advice about our IT partners, why your control system interface should be a singular, and whatever happened to Microsoft Hub's promises. That and more on this episode of AV Week.
The network for the AV industry.
What are you listening to?
This
is AV.
This
is AVNation.
This is AVNation.
This is AV Week, episode 370. Help Me Help You. Recorded September 28th, 2018.
Support for AVNation is brought to you by
Peerless AV, driving technology through innovation.
And by HD Base T.
And welcome everybody to AV Week, your source for AV news, integration, news, and information. I'm your host today, George Tucker. Glad to have you with us. Today we have a really great set of people. Not that we don't have great people all the time, but a really good panel today. They are in order. It's Chris Fitzsimmons. He is product manager at BIAMP. Good to see you, sir.
Yeah, thank you very much for having me on. Nice to be here.
All right. It's been a while, at least for you and me. And also Luke Jordan. He is from Electroacoustics. Good to see you, sir.
Good to have you. Good to be back. Thanks for having me.
All right. And of course, last but not least, Marco Duai. She is editor-at-large, AV Technology Magazine. Good to see you.
Hey everyone, good to see you too. Let's all just together swirl our eyes with power before we begin.
Swirl our eyes with power, yes. The offline conversation comes into the recording. Very cool. Margo, though, before we start, I mean, you're in New York. You're obviously in a hotel bar lobby, as a good journalist should be. What are you doing in New York?
So yesterday was wonderful. We had our AVIT Leadership Summit and also co-located with the SCN think tank, and there were about 120 people in attendance. And, you know, as we become more digitally entrenched with a variety of media sources and conversations happening, and I do apologize about the sound, hopefully I'm coming in clearly. I think we need a nice BIAMP pickup system here that I can just, can automatically configure to wherever I am. It's just going to be the new auto tracking feature that BIAMP comes out with, the auto Margo tracking. But the summit is great because, I don't know, the more virtual we become as we are here, but when you can meet up in live real time, it's great. I mean, you can have long conversations, you can see different perspectives and have a richer experience and exchange of ideas. And that's what we're really trying to do with AVT, is just build community among technology managers and also just try to create a forum for their pain points, their friction points, where we can offer editorial that is just more of value. And that's why I really enjoy our live events. And Chris has been a part of them, which is great. If I'm not mistaken, his last panel was called Networking Nightmares, which I appreciated very much. Although I lobbied for Waking Terrors or, Night Terrors.
I don't know. They definitely give me nightmares rather than Waking Terrors. I'm usually okay with them when they're actually happening. It's the thinking about them and the losing sleep over them beforehand that's really the problem for me.
Yeah, right.
But it was great.
That's really cool.
All day yesterday, and that's nice to be on the other side of that. So
very cool. Very cool. All right, well, without further ado, I've probably given Tim some heart palpitations that we've started this way, but that's okay. Our first story comes from Sound and Communications Magazine, relationship advice for AV practitioners. Now, no, this is not an agony column for the AV set. It really is about how to woo your IT department, and hint, flowers really won't do it, at least not in the beginning. In particular, this talks about AVIX's recommended practices for security and networked AV systems. So, Chris, I'm going to start with you since Margo said one of your last talks was about this kind of stuff. The article goes on to talk about, communicating at the same level with our friends in the IT department. My first thing is, do we still really have that big of a communication gap with the IT department?
Yes. I know I shouldn't give one answer, but yes.
Yeah, and I shouldn't ask yes or no questions, so there you go.
It's kind of like the old joke used to be, or the line when I was editing and way back was, learn to speak IT, right? That was this kind of the hook that editors and journalists would use to kind of write this kind of article. And it's still true. It's still necessary. And it's just like learning French or German or Spanish, right? You can learn enough to find your way out of being lost, but it doesn't mean you're fluent. And really, if you want to have a good relationship with a French or German person, then you can't just say, how do I get to the bus stop? And can I have 5 beers, please? You've got to be able to say, you've got to be able to like empathize and talk about their cultural issues. And if you want to have that kind of sympathetic relationship with someone, you've got to be able to do more than just make yourself understood. And so I think that it is really, really important not just to know what the words are, but to know what they mean and how to use them. It's all very well throwing buzzwords and knowing what the acronyms stand for and knowing that 802.1x is a thing. But you can get yourself in more trouble than not by throwing a bunch of words around that you don't really understand. And so, yes, it's great to kind of know the jargon. That's step 1. But step 2, step 3, step 4, and step 5 is understand it and understand what it means and why they care about it. And so, yeah, I think it's really, really important that AV guys understand their limitations, because that's actually much more useful, is to be honest and say, I'm out of my depth. I'm going to go talk to the guy that knows. Or can we talk about this? Help me understand. And I do that a lot as a product manager, right? I have a responsibility at Biamp for the kind of security status of our product line. It's one of my hats, and I need them because I'm kind of losing the hair now. But it's about knowing what you don't know and knowing where to go to find out what you don't know, and then applying that. It's not just, hey, yeah, I speak IT now and I know what a network is and I know what IGMP is. It's not enough. It's not good enough. And in some ways it's potentially dangerous, right? You can get yourself in a bunch of trouble if you think you know what a foreign language is and then you say some word that some guy taught you that actually is a swear word. It's the same kind of problem.
Well, Margot, let me throw that to you then, because Chris says it's sort of, we're walking around sometimes like first-year French students thinking we know the mastery of the language, probably trying to quote Proust or something and go from there. But sometimes we feel like, or at least the AV-centric people will say, really feels more like they're stiff-arming us. Is this battle in communication also partly IT saying, I have power, I have the guy power swirl, so I'm not going to listen to that. I'm going to do it my way?
Well, from what I observe, and from my perch as editor of a tech manager publication, what I find really interesting is that it really should be, instead of AV-IT convergence, I think in a lot of ways it should be IT-AV convergence, because I think if you just look at the scale of the IT industry and the scale of the AV industry, and by no means am I demoting the eye-swirling power of AV, the uniqueness and charisma and talent of AV. It's just that I think it's almost imperative on the AV manager or AV director or stakeholder to not necessarily, I'm going to walk it back just a little bit, just know the ecosystem in which we're operating. So if a tech manager who was in our summit yesterday, a phenomenal woman from the Wentworth Institute in the center of Boston. It's a higher education institution devoted to technological innovation. But they have a very small AV team within the IT department. And so when she needs static IP addresses, she just literally looks over at the guy at the next desk and says, hey, hook me up. So that's an ideal situation because they're absolutely one. But in a lot of the folks that I interview and that we do storytelling with, they are within that larger IT infrastructure, and or maybe it's the CFO or an IT, let's say, stakeholder that's signing the checks, and you have to make yourself bulletproof if you want a new AV software solution, or you want, the Biamp to Serial Lux that can run AVB video on a network kind of thing. And so sometimes I think it's important to know the language, but also just understand their needs and listen to their needs as well, so that you can make your needs align with exactly the requirements. And so just understanding each other. I don't know if all the AV managers that I interview really want to learn all the granularities of IT. Mm-hmm. I mean, it depends, it depends on who you talk to. Like the woman yesterday, Johanna, she was great. I mean, she loves really being a cross-trained person. Like AV is part of IT in her world. So that's great. But then there's some that no, I care about, I don't know, frequency, and I'm more of an audio gal or who knows what, but maybe it depends. It's a case-by-case basis, but I think it's just really important to have that framework of where are we operating within. And so letting that help inform our decision-making. But I love that AVIXA has done this, and it's created a best practice, which I think is really, really stellar, that you can just go, to this URL, which is included in the link, and find these security best practices, which is fantastic.
And the document's really good. I actually presented
really
it to the AV user group. Well, I didn't present it to them, but I attended the AV user group and presented around security last week. And it's not aimed at those guys. Those are like top echelon blue chip AV IT guys. They kind of write some of the security policies. They don't need to be told, but they were impressed that AVIXA is kind of taking on this role of, we need security 101. We need to understand, we know how to write a risk register. Like, how do you go about itemizing risks and classifying them and deciding whether they're big risk, little risks, high risk? It's a whole other language of hazard management that we've never really, as an AV industry, never really thought about. We just about figured out how to describe our product in ways that IT guys understand. Like, it's a video encoder. What does that mean? Well, it does this and this and this over this port and this thing. Oh, okay, now I understand. But now it's like, okay, well, what's a risk? How do I describe a risk? What are its characteristics? And then, it's more new news, more new learning for us.
And as software-defined ecosystems become more achievable, and life cycles change and upgrades continue to happen within, more software, like in a more IT kind of way, I think the auditing, the provisioning are going to become more and more and more and more important. So I agree that I love it. I think it's great to bring everyone into the same conversation and work to our strengths. It depends. I don't know. I just interviewed somebody who's a network native, let's say. She's on the cover of our AV Technology October edition. She's only known network-based AV. Her first job was at the London Olympics, working the cameras, doing sound. She's never known anything but a network-based system. So, it's changing too. And I could see it from a variety of angles.
She's like one of those people that never had a cell phone. Or only ever had a cell phone.
Only had a cell phone. Yeah.
Hasn't lived before we had cell phones.
The pain.
So I want to bring Luke into this. He's been waiting patiently. We've been gabbing it up. So Luke, on two levels here. Margot mentioned basically which boils down to the learning how to help me help you scenario. But on a bigger question, CTS, when it was revised for the test, made a big deal about client relationships, especially for younger or beginning techs, to be aware of what their clients' needs are, not just being quiet and understanding that it's a place of business, but often even in the AV, on the residential side, saying, take off your shoes or wear booties. I think this may actually work within that as well, right? Am I wrong in saying that on the grander scale, we need to basically instill more of a complementary sort of zeitgeist in the integration side of the industry, especially commercial?
It really depends on the client. So I met with a corporate client the other day who, when I started asking about security and kind of what their expectation was, they said, I don't know. I'm going to have to punt that to my managed services provider. They had no understanding of their own IT infrastructure, and they had no expectations. And so as the AV integrator, I was driving the IT conversation with their corporate IT department, which is kind of backwards. But at the same time, I'm now challenging them on their turf to almost be better. And so the value that I'm bringing is, we don't do managed services. We do networked AV. There is a difference, I think. And so we're working hand in hand with their data infrastructure, but we're not doing that part for them. But now if they work with me, I'm going to force both of us to be better. I'm raising the bar for the AV and the IT and the areas that converge and work together. And then as we get into a relationship, we can build a secure network that we're communicating and presenting over. And so now we're just in this great symbiotic relationship. That's going to increase my knowledge and my skill, because I'm going to have to stay ahead of the services and products that I'm selling. But then they're also going to be not less at risk. They will have better risk management and awareness of their IT systems and who's being on there. My hope is that I can challenge them to not just say, well, let me bring in my third party, I'm coming in for AV and talk to this guy for our managed services and IT. And at that point, they don't own anything. And so by challenging them, maybe they still need me to talk to their guy, but they'll have that information, they'll have that knowledge more at hand because they realize that it's a weakness, even just the fact that they don't have a strategy or a plan that they can easily recite. So I think it's just about a marriage of the AV and the IT, and I don't know who comes first. I think it depends on the situation. I also work with other universities where they say IT is separate. You can't have any wireless access points. We don't want anything on our network. Everything is a closed loop AV network that communicates within itself, and there will be no bleed over because of university bylaws and policies that I couldn't change if I wanted to. So it's just kind of case by case, and as an integrator, we have to know enough to recognize where we're at, when it's good to push back, and when it's just time to work within the parameters we're given.
Mm-hmm. Well, I like that you also brought up the marriage metaphor here to tie up the little metaphor we started off with in the beginning of an agony column. In relation to that, though, in a marriage, you also need to know how to interface with each other. So that brings us to our next story from Commercial Integrator. 3 reasons to put just one interface in your control system design. Now, one would think this is kind of an obvious statement, but the author goes on to talk about how keeping happy clients and profits higher by providing a standard interface. All right, so Chris, start with you on this one again. While I know that this is what we want to offer and our clients often say that's what they want, it's not always the reality now, is it?
No. Sorry, I'm doing the monosyllables again.
There you go.
I just want to start by saying I can't believe they only found 3 reasons.
Yeah.
There are like 6,948 reasons to do this. It's really tough, right? But it's funny because it comes back to what comes back to integration, right? The whole deal with trying to have only one interface, the fewer interfaces you have, the more integration that has to go on behind the scenes. If you literally want to have one, let's call it family of GUIs, because one GUI is probably not going to cut it, but one family of design to control multiple services and systems, that's a bunch of work in the back end to make that happen. It's actually a really challenging, the worst case is I've got a keypad dialer over here, I've got a touch panel over here, I've got some light switch on the wall, and I've got, whatever else, fan control or HVAC in the meeting room. Even just getting those things in one place is hard-ish, right? It's got easier. We've got better and better. Crestron and all the other guys in control land have done a great job of giving us tools there. But if you're going to try and make that consistent throughout a building, not just in one meeting room, it's tough. It's a lot of work, but that's really the value that AV integrators bring, right? Was back in the day when it was all analog and we were figuring out how to get different kinds of cables to all make sense as a system. It's the same kind of work. It's how do I take these disparate systems with disparate kinds of characteristics that I have to control and make them make sense to some guy, Patty in accounting who wants to come and sit down and have a quick, productive meeting rather than fighting with which button to press.
Yeah. So let me ask Luke, I'm going to throw this to you. Let me ask what seems like a blatantly obvious question, but I think there's more nuance to it, is that in the real world, what form does this universal and utopian interface take? The article goes on to mention a single login. Are we talking only web-based interfaces here? How are we managing that universal utopian interface?
Well, that's the joy of living in the current century we do, is there's options. So Barco Overture is a network-based control solution. Crestron has hardware and software-based control systems. There's just tons of different options, and there's pros and cons with all of them. But when you get to actually talking to analog devices, there are network I/O interfaces for everything. We can do relays and IR and dry contact, everything off of just a network port. Or we could have a central hub that runs an entire floor, and then we just trunk everything together and all the floors communicate. I mean, it's just, it's infinitely scalable. It does get tricky. I'm not a programmer. I'm not a designer. I'm in sales. But my understanding is if one manufacturer makes everything, it's designed to talk well amongst itself, but you kind of run the risk of, because they do everything, they might not be the best at doing that specific activity. But then when you have, say 15 different manufacturers controlling the 15 different parts of your building, from AV to lighting to HVAC and energy automation and big data collection, you lose your effectiveness in being able to actually get what you want to happen done. You go from telling it what needs to happen to just recalling a preset in someone else's processor, and now you're a slave to that processor's programming and how well that was done. But it's also easier on your integrator to tie it all together that way. So it comes down to the vendor options, the ease of programming, and then your cost. And are you willing to bundle everything together or sub it out individually? And then your project management labor and difficulty goes up. So I'd say it's definitely something that has to be thought out, well planned, and maybe it's even having an owner's rep or a consultant involved who has kind of a broader horizon level view of who all the trades involved are and what the options to tie all that together is. But there's options, and you're not just forced into one corner now.
Okay. So Margot, being what we've said here, and you having that view of seeing the disparate dealers and everyone talking to each other, you have an insight with the manufacturers, with the integrators, us. Is there any possibility that this utopian ideal, and I don't say that mockingly, I mean that utopian ideal of a single interface, is there any chance that it could stymie innovation, that we're stuck in one?
It's a really interesting question. I mean, let's look at the consumer model in a lot of ways. I can, with this, have my own consumer AV over IP experience with Netflix, for example, on a very small level. But also I can check in my home, even though I'm states away from my home in Massachusetts. I could look and see what the temperature is via my, Mitsubishi mini split, which I have connected through my, Wi-Fi. So I think that there is an innovation that's expected at the current moment, because it's permeated our entire lives through whether you're Droid-based or, iOS-based. And I think that I wouldn't say the one-stop shop idea would stymie it. I think it would be something that one would hope, would have an open API kind of framework or sensibility to it, which also has its pros and cons. Sometimes an open API doesn't do everything that you want. It only goes so far, but I think it's sort of a broad question that interests me, but it would be hard to say because we don't necessarily have that. I mean, when you do have someone like a Crestron, for example, that has, or an Extron that has our hardware and software for pretty much everything, including the XO Cloud or Fusion, for example, for monitoring room utilization, gathering the data that you might find useful the next time you go through an RFP process or a bid, or thinking about CapEx versus operational expenses. That data is incredibly important. And again, who wants to pull it from this, okay, I have a Lona system here, I have a Crestron here, I have, HVAC here. If I could absolutely have that aggregated, it's more expedient. And then maybe I can spend more time figuring out what story the data is telling me if it's just from one ecosystem. I'm sorry again about the noise. Hopefully you can still hear me. But I think since we don't have it yet, and it's not quite the model yet, it's still something that I think is interesting, but I would love to see that in place. And I think that we have people striving for that. I mean, the Lona OmniStream is Crestron new cloud-based solutions. But I guess the peripheral nature and the ways that we're still very proprietary in the AV industry kind of is very much that barrier to that adoption at this point. I mean, you have some open source moves by like the SRT Alliance and things like that, AVV, of course, but I still think it's too early to tell about innovation and where that could go. But I'm excited by it, and I would love to see it.
All right. Well, riding on your idea that some innovation may be in question here, a questionable innovation from our friends at Ars Technica: Surface Hub 2 splits into two. This is an article from our folks at Ars Technica about how the Surface Hub 2 may not be coming with everything it promised, but it promises a lot. And as we know, the Surface Hub has been an enigma in the AV integration space. Mm-hmm. Luke, I'm going to start with you. The Surface has been an enigma in this space. It hasn't always worked out despite its potential. Why do you think that is?
Long pause.
Yeah.
I think it's just one of those things where it tries to do so much on its own, it almost doesn't want to play well with others. And in AV, we're looking at everything that's going on inside and outside of the room. And it's such a self-contained, all-in-one piece, or it tries to be, that you're really just not sure how you play with it. I don't know. That's kind of all I got on that.
That's all right. That's all right. Yes, Chris?
Sorry. Yeah, so I got a little insight on this. I think that a lot of people mistake Microsoft Surface as some kind of, the Surface Hub as like their strategy for making money. And really all Microsoft wants to do is sell you O365 licenses and Skype for Business licenses and so the Surface Hub is almost a proof of concept. It's, hey, look at this. This is what you can do with all our stuff. And I think what they expected to happen was that a bazillion OEMs out there would make Surface Hub-like things, right? But because it's so expensive and so complex, it's actually really difficult to make one that performs as well as it does. But if you go look at what else they did, like with the little tabletop thing, I can't remember what it's called right now.
Right.
The Skype room system stuff, a bunch of other people have actually made their spin on that, right? There's a Logitech one, there's a Polycom one, there's a Crestron one, there's a whatever else one. And I think they kind of expected or hoped that that's what would happen with the Surface Hub. And if you go look at NEC, they've got a similar kind of thing. Cisco has a similar kind of thing. Obviously, that's a competitor, but I don't think they had planned for it to be the only thing of its type.
Right. Okay. Well,
so I think that aside to what they've done with 2, which I think it's symptomatic of the challenges they've had bringing it to market. Right. They got to bring something to market. They announced it, and now they're like, oh, okay, now we need to really bring this to market, and we're going to have to make some compromises. But then they did a kind of a smart thing, which is to put this module in the back, because the problem with the display in a meeting room is it has a life expectancy of 3 years. Anybody want to spend $50,000 on something that's going to last 3 years? No. So what do we do about that? We need to upgrade the hardware, or we need a way to kind of switch out some of it and keep some investment. So maybe the modularization of the guts in the back is a smart play. I don't know.
Well, Margot, I'm going to let you have the last word on this. In the comments of this article, a number of people chatted and railed about what they called architect-centric tech, which is to say that they make a pretty concept, but the translation into a useful reality didn't always come through. Is Surface Hub sort of like Chris is almost saying here? Is that what's happening here?
Well, it's going to take another 20 years for me to fully get over Microsoft Bob. So they have so much make good to do with me personally, if you're listening, Microsoft. Okay, it's about the user experience. I mean, I didn't read the comments. I never read the comments. But, like, I like the look of this. I like it's bezel-free. I like the specs. It looks great. But what's the interface like? I mean, you could Google Jamboard, Cisco Spark. Everybody's trying to get their ecosystem. I totally agree with Chris. I think it's almost like a proof of concept. But it's also like, okay, let's have if we have the Microsoft Surface, we have licensing. It's like these are kind of other ways of just fully permeating a Microsoft space or a Microsoft campus or something like that. So, I think it really comes down to the intuitive interface. I love the modularity. I think that's almost like, I see AV as a service as a really interesting model in some regards. I see the pros and cons absolutely of that. But some of the folks that I speak with on a weekly basis, are almost more interested in leasing. Like leasing, if they could lease restaurant equipment, they would do it. So this is answering that need before it even arrives. And I think that's actually really smart. It still doesn't heal the visual wounds I have from Microsoft Bob, but it's getting me closer. No, but I mean, for real, I think it's
the scars.
The scars. But I think it is about how intuitive it is. What's the interface? I do dig the modularity for sure, but I think it's yet to be determined. It doesn't feel almost like an AV product. I mean, not in our little weird and wonderful little, fantasy land that we live in. But I think it's certainly, I'd like to see the numbers on it, and I want to see the distribution strategy because I'm intrigued by that too.
I've just realized that it reminds me of something from the Wayback Machine. Those portrait digital screens. Anybody remember Polyvision Thunder?
Okay, well, with that, we're not going to end on a bad note.
Oh my gosh, your eyes are swirling with power.
I want to thank my guest for an entertaining half hour of tech talk here and conversation. First of all, Chris Fitzsimmons from Biamp. Sir, what's going on with you? What can we do? Where can we find out more about what you're doing in Biamp?
Well, you can find out what we're doing at Biamp.com, as always. We're at the shows. We'll be at ISE. We've just been talking about that this week's topic. I know it seems like a terribly long way away, but it is officially the beginning of ISE stress. That starts this morning, so that's going to be fun. But yeah, keep an eye on the website, keep an eye on our YouTube channel, all the usual places.
All right, and Luke Jordan from Electrical Acoustics. Sir, tell us more about where they can find out about your company and what you're doing.
You can find our company at AVI.com. We're doing lots of cool things. And you can find me on Twitter at Luke Jordan EAVI.
It's been a while.
It's been about 2 hours.
There you go. All right, and Margot Duwahi, and I got that name right. Look at that. Editor-at-large at AV Technology Magazine. Briefly, what's next for you?
Well, I would like to point everyone to a recent cover story of Mohammed Sagari, who is the global AV engineer of Uber. That was my last cover story, and it's just a really fun example of what we do at AV Technology. We profile tech managers, so that's available on avnetwork.com. You can follow all of my writing there. Thank you so much for this fun, wonderful Friday chat, everyone.
There you go. Well, to everyone out there watching, okay, this is AVWeek, part of AVNation. AVNation is a group of verticals on the AV industry. You can find this show and many more like it on the residential, commercial, the ITAV, and more. That's avnation.tv. Thank you for watching, and we look forward to speaking with all of you again very soon.